Some women were trained early to be the strong one, the peacemaker, the responsible one, the caretaker. They learned to keep their needs quiet, hold everyone else together, and wear a perfect game face, even when their inner world is exhausted. This episode is for the woman who has spent her life caring for everyone else and is finally realizing she deserves care too. Are you tired of repeating the same patterns, feeling stuck in your story, and wondering if real change is even possible? In my book, Unstuck, Break Free from What's Holding You Back and Create a Life You Love, I walk you through the path from survival to transformation, blending faith, neuroscience, and soul-deep healing. This book, it's not just words on a page. It's a companion for your journey. Whether you've experienced trauma or just feel lost in the noise of life, Unstuck will meet you there with truth, compassion, and tools that actually work. It's time to stop surviving and start living your story with purpose. Grab your copy today on Amazon. Welcome back to the It's Your Story to Tell podcast. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and today I am here with Julie Amy. She is a mom of 6, a business owner, and mentor in early childhood leadership. Julie's story carries themes so many will recognize in their own life. Growing up in a family system marked by pain, becoming the reliable caretaker, navigating shame and silence in church culture, and building a life that looks put together. But in all of that, she was still carrying the weight of being the one who has to hold it all together. I just am so thankful that you're here with me today and that you're willing to share your story with our audience.
Megan, thank you. I really appreciate the care that you bring to these conversations. It means so much to be here today.
I warned you, we just jump right into our stories. And so if you would just take us back to where do you think the caretaker role began for you? Maybe what was your home environment like as a child? And how did that shape you into who you became?
Yeah, I think the caretaker role began very early for me. I grew up in a home with an abusive father, and fortunately or unfortunately for me, my brother received the bulk of that. He was 4 years older than me, and being a firstborn and a boy, I think it shaped itself differently for him than it did for me. He received the bulk of the physical abuse, and I learned quickly that my job was more well suited to stay quiet and to stay small and to not make anything worse. I became more of the observer. I was the one who got really good at reading the room and anticipating moods, and I tried to keep things kind of calm. I didn't really have language for it then. Like most kids in families with abuse, I didn't really realize that anything was different for me than it was for anyone else. But I did learn that my needs were kind of inconvenienced. So being good meant not needing much. It meant being safe, and it kind of meant being invisible. So I became the strong one by default, not because I was strong, but because someone kind of had to hold it together.
You described parentification in that description you gave of where, as a child, you are having to take on these responsibilities that you weren't ready for, and having to step in and try to manage the situation in order to keep it as peaceful as you possibly could. How did that early childhood experience then shape how you were able to maybe talk about feelings and emotions and other things that it led to in other relationships?
Yeah, I think what I can see now that I couldn't see then was that my mom did a really good job of keeping us away from it. We did a lot of going places. We did a lot of staying away from home, a lot of packing up in the car and going and visiting relatives. And I didn't know then that it was kind of keeping us out of harm's way. But talking about what was going on at home was never a conversation that was had out loud. Silence was really the norm in the house. So even to the degree of My mom spending about 16 years having cancer. We didn't talk about it at all. That wasn't a conversation. Even up to like 2 weeks before she passed away, the only conversation that she and I would have during her declining health was me asking her, like, how do you want this to go? Like, how do you want this to be? And she would say to me, I just don't want you to be sad. And so my response to her, of course, at that time was, well, I'm going to be sad. And today's not that day. So we don't have to talk about that right now. And what it really kind of taught me and what that meant to me was like, don't make this harder for me. So to
Mm,
me, what I learned was that grieving was really kind of meant to be done alone, or scary was meant to be done alone. And what I really learned from my mom, again, as I look back at the way that she managed emotions, was that feelings were kind of a sign of weakness. So you manage them, you keep them to yourself, you stuff them in, you do whatever it is that you need to do, and you move on and you hold tight. And emotions were something that were managed privately, not something to be held together as a family. And I would say that followed me into adulthood. So I became very capable and very functional and very strong. And I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to let someone sit with me in feelings or share feelings with me. And I just carried them. I carried the responsibility for them.
wow. So many similarities. I didn't have a physically abusive household, but we just didn't know how to really talk about feelings and emotions. It was all about continuing to move forward and have a better life and get further ahead, love
Push
God
through.
more and push through.
Hmm.
So if you're listening to this story, you don't have to have physical violence and abuse in a home to experience some of these similarities of patterns that you learn in how to communicate and engage with others. I know in my own life, it ended up having greater impact on me than I even realized. And when I
Hmm.
was 16 and had something really traumatic happen, I thought I have to handle this alone, just like what you were saying. I disobeyed. I was in the wrong place. So this was expected. You know, when you get out of alignment and you're not in a protective space, then there's consequences. And I had so much shame around that. And I held on to that for 20 years of my life. And it dictated what I thought about myself. It impacted my identity of not being good enough. How could God love me? How could anyone love me? Then found myself choosing unhealthy, toxic relationships in my adult life that continued this pattern of harm. And I continued the pattern of silence and people pleasing and perfectionism to try to make it look like I had it all together when yet everything was falling apart. And it kept me stuck. I was trapped. I didn't want this life. I had dreams of what marriage and family and serving God was supposed to look like and feel like. And it was nothing of what I was dreaming. And
Hmm.
that's honestly made it some days even harder. Like I just wanted to get rid of the dreams because I was living in this place of this is my reality. This is what I feel God has for me, but yet I just wasn't good enough. And so it was like this constant disappointment in myself and the situation that I was in. But because I didn't know the root of where that was originating from, I didn't know how to heal and even allow God to love me and redeem me in that place. And it was not until a really big breaking point for me that I was able to start getting curious and looking further to understand why I was making these choices. Because for a
Hmm.
long time, I didn't want to look at that I played a role in my choices or the lack of choosing, you know, by saying I'm a victim in this. That was my mindset. This is just what happens to victims. This is just the life you get because of what happened. And I didn't realize that I didn't have to choose that. Was there a breaking point, a shifting point, something that allowed you to begin reprogramming your beliefs to move into a healthier place?
I think if I can just touch on that church culture for a split second, I think that that's an interesting place to go just because while at home looks like one thing, I think there was always, my dad always cared so much about the perception of what it looked like when we were at church. Like he would very rarely go to church with us, but we would have to have, what mattered the most to him was that I would have on an Easter dress and an Easter bonnet. And like things needed to look as though he was successful
Mm,
and he was creating a successful looking family, and everything had to look a certain way and look the part. But the reality was that in real life, and we didn't talk about, my brother being beaten with a belt and getting his eye slashed open and my mom passing out and then him looking at us both and saying, "See what you both did?" And then my brother going to the doctor and getting stitches the next day in his eye. And we didn't talk about that either. But don't worry, we went to church and we had on nice clothing, and we went to church and we sat in the same row that my grandma sat in with my dad and all of his siblings their whole life in the exact same church in the exact same town. And it was the row that the family name all sat in, right?
mhm,
Craziness. So as I was raised Catholic, church was a huge part of my identity. But then I got divorced. So
mhm,
while I did everything perfect and I continued to perpetuate that, everything looking like I had it together. My brother would not be perfect. He would get in trouble because he was an ordinary in sports and he was an ordinary student, and he was the firstborn and my dad had these expectations of him and he would have whatever his experience was with my dad. I was in the meantime the one who was being quiet, and I was the girl, and I was the what would look like the favorite, and that would infuriate my brother because I was not getting the wrath of what was going on for whatever reason, because I was a girl or whatever that
mhm,
perception was. And all of our perception is our own reality, no matter what age, and as it all changes as we grow. While we continued to move through that time period, I continued to have this perfect life and do everything right. And I went to college and I married my high school sweetheart, and I would start having kids, and I would start my kids going to Catholic school, and then I would get divorced. And I felt really clearly that I no longer fit in my church environment. All 6 of my kids went to Catholic school. And so it wasn't just that we were in our normal go to church every Sunday environment. We spent more of our time in our church community than just guest appearances on Sunday. There was a sense of being watched and judged, and like I was a cautionary tale instead of a person. So I carried a lot of shame in that because I didn't believe that I was bad, but I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. So that season for me kind of started to create me separating my relationship with God from the actual building that I was going to. And I realized that my faith really had to be mine. And it was personal, it wasn't performative, it was quiet, and it was honest. So that's something that I thought was a real big change for me, was that whether it was Catholic or whether it was any other denomination, my belief system and my relationship really became my very own. And regardless even of my kids being in Catholic school, it became really important to me in my conversations with my kids that it not be strictly about Catholicism, that it be really more about us all living a life that was being good humans in the world, and that our
mhm,
relationships with God were ours. That they didn't belong in that building. They could belong anywhere where we were. And so that I think was really pivotal. Now my oldest is 32 and my youngest is just turned 13 over Christmas. We're still having those conversations about how we actually apply and see our faith in action. For her over Christmas, that was cleaning up some of the trees in our light up the park experience in our community. When it was time to take all of the trees down, we were helping actually drag the trees to put in a pile to have the local Department of Public Works, come pick them up. That was us doing it because it was the right thing to do. It wasn't because of our faith. It was because we were being servants in our community. And that's the thing that I think is just as important, as that's a reflection of our good works in our community and caring for the people who are around us. And there was an old guy who was doing it too. And the more that we did, the less he did. So that was us taking care of our neighbor as well. And so those are the kinds of things that I wanted for me to be sure to model. But not only that, I wanted to make sure and instill that in her as an act of us living good humans in the world, not just talking about Catholicism or any other denomination of faith, but being sure we were doing good works. So those, I think, my relationship with God became mine, and my impression that I give of faith and good works with my children, I think, are really an important pivotal moment that came for me moving forward, regardless of whatever my past was.
As you're sharing that, the thing that really stood out to me is that you are a cycle breaker. You are saying, we're not going to continue this same narrative. We're going to find our God, how he wants us to show up and be different. We're going to be authentic. We're going to allow him to change us to where we are different than what I grew up in. I'm going to find what God has for me and do the healing work, because I don't want to keep passing down something that's not true. And so when we look at our life, and when I think back to my life where I was living in so much brokenness, and the fruits of that life were brokenness, it was causing harm in my own children's life. And it wasn't all that God had for me, because I knew there was more. I just didn't know how to get to it.
There.
And so I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think one of the first steps that the Lord gave me in that broken place was to measure my thoughts. And not just, I'm going to speak scripture over my life. I'm going to say positive affirmations, and that's going to change my life. Contrary to popular belief, your thoughts don't change your life. Your thoughts give you a window into your beliefs. And so when he asked me to measure my thoughts, I was like, okay, now what? What do I do with them once I see them? Because I knew my thoughts were a mess. My thoughts were chaotic, and I was trying to think good thoughts, but my life wasn't changing. And so we're going to talk about in part 2 how we actually move into changing our life and living in the reality of who we were created to be, so that we can then have a legacy of health, wholeness, healing, hope, and all of these really amazing things that I believe we were created for. We just have to figure out, how do we make that transition and deal with the past so that we don't have to repeat the past. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that it captures what so many women are maybe walking through, but have a hard time naming. And that's what's so important, I think, about this podcast, is we are talking about the things that people rarely talk about, in hopes that others will be able to say, you know what? I see some of those things happening in my own life. Because when you can name it and you can bring it from the darkness into the light, it is there that you can move, like in your life, from being the caretaker and the peacekeeper, living in that survival identity, to really be able to heal and challenge those identities that you didn't really want to have in your life.
Right.
Exactly. Come back, listen to part 2, so that you can hear about how moving from the place she was to where she is today, and how she is taking all of that knowledge and experience and using it to make a difference. Our stories are so powerful, and they have the ability to be a roadmap for other people when we bravely share them. Thanks so much, Julie, for being here with me in part 1.
Absolutely. Thank you.